And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and co-chair, Jason Lewis.
Thanks, Representative Peisch, and thank you, Representative Sanchez. Great to see you, and of course, Amanda Fernandez and everybody at Latinos for Education, a wonderful and important organization. Want to thank all of our House and Senate colleagues and staff for joining us for this important briefing today. You know, as we all know, it was the great disadvantages and disparities and inequities in educational opportunity for Latino students and other students of color in Massachusetts that really drove the passage of the Student Opportunity Act. Last year, it's hard to believe, it was only about a year ago right now that that was signed into law. And many of us, you know, worked on that for many years. As Representative Peisch said, the pandemic has just further laid bare how significant, you know, those disparities are. And we are indeed seeing disproportionately Latino students and other students of color, you know, having to learn fully remotely during the pandemic, whereas whiter and more affluent students and communities are more likely to still be able to have some, at least some time in the classroom. And as Latinos for Education report sets out, and I look forward to just, you know, presenting the details, that is contributing to increased mental health concerns and issues for Latino students. It's also, they are dealing with, you know, food and income and housing insecurity in their families. And of course, dealing with, you know, technological disparities and the digital divide as well. So very important that we talk about these issues and that we work on solutions. And that's why, you know, it's important that we have this collaboration. I just wanted to quickly mention, I don't know if we will cover them today, but in looking at Latinos for Education's overall agenda, wanted to note two items that are on your agenda that I think Representative Peisch and I and other members of the Education Committee also feel very strongly about and look forward to working with you on. One of those is expanding access to high quality, affordable early education and care. I know that's not a main topic for today, but another very important issue that's very important to obviously to Latino families as well in the Commonwealth. And then another important issue on your priority list is increasing diversity among teachers and administrators. And again, also another critical area of need. Again, not a main focus for the forum today, but just wanted to flag those two issues as ones that I know are on your agenda and that we share as well, and look forward to working with you on those. So thanks again for everybody's hard work, and appreciate the opportunity to have this briefing together. Yeah, back to you, I guess.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Chairwoman Peisch. So as we move forward, I'm pleased to open up our panel, first by introducing the leader of our organization, Latinos for Education, Amanda Fernandez, who is the co-founder and the CEO of the organization, and she is a member of and a trustee of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And Amanda, you get to kick us off with our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Chairwoman Peisch and Chairman Lewis, for hosting us today, as well as the rest of the Education Committee members, and to all the legislators and guests on the call today. We appreciate your participation, and you're taking the time to listen and hear more about collective solutions we can have to address the tech equity issues in the Commonwealth. I don't need to reintroduce myself. I'll just say a bit about Latinos for Education. We are a Boston-based but national organization that is Latino founded, Latino led, and we focus on advocacy and leadership in our work. We center the voices of Latino students, educators, and families in our discussions about education. We also believe that we will be stronger when we prioritize the educational needs of Latino students, and we play an important role in achieving equity for Latino students so that they have the opportunity to fully participate as citizens of this Commonwealth and the country. As Senator Lewis mentioned, we also believe that our education system will be strengthened when we have more diverse educators and leaders in our education workforce. And we believe that it's really important to center Latino representation from the schoolhouse to the State House. And so we spend a lot of time working on those issues. I'm going to frame our conversation on Tech para Todos with a little bit of context on the current state of Latino education, the Commonwealth in particular, and a little bit on what is happening in the country as a basis to sort of understand where we've been and where we need to go. So when we talk about Latino education and outcomes, we're not just talking about a group of students. We're talking about the prosperity and the future of our economy, the Commonwealth, and of our nation. Because Latinos make up 25% of our nation's public school students. And in cities across Massachusetts like Boston and Worcester, we make up over 40% of the student population. In cities like Lawrence, as you well know, over 90% of the students are Latino. And there are 14 school districts in Massachusetts that have over 40% Latino student population. So it really is an issue of demography. It's just not something we can ignore because of the increase in the representation of our students and the makeup of our students in our schools. We are the fastest growing student population, not just in K through 12, but in higher ed. We are multicultural, we are multilingual, and we bring a richness and many assets to our communities. And yet, along with that, we overcome many adversities in the classroom. And these can be only overcome when there is equitable access to supports and quality learning experiences. Again, we represent the future of the Commonwealth, and therefore it's so important to see the success of Latino students as success of the Commonwealth. A few of the challenges and some of our principles and priorities I'll talk a little bit about. And of course, right in front of us is, of course, how COVID-19 is impacting our students. We know that Latino students are experiencing learning loss at higher rates than their other peers. They have less access to supports and services that can address their social and emotional health. They face gaps in access to tech and devices and broadband, which is why we're here today, that we know can make or break the level of engagement that a student may have when remote learning or hybrid learning is offered. So that is borne out by recent data regarding enrollments across the Commonwealth. And so we're seeing a pretty significant dip in enrollment, as again, many of you know. We can't unsee what is happening with COVID-19 and what it's exposed about the underlying inequities that affect Latino communities. And so I want to bring attention to a few things that are happening with these equity challenges that are now exacerbated with COVID-19 impacting our community. The first is, again, as already alluded to, opportunities around funding. And I also want to just thank the legislature and of course the Education Committee for the work you all did on the Student Opportunity Act. And I will just personally say it was very gratifying to see that there were so many stakeholders across the Commonwealth that came out in support of the Student Opportunity Act. So I'll just emphasize that we want to make sure we continue to put a focus on closing equity gaps with equitable funding for low-income communities that really need the services and supports as a means to help and an opportunity to help start closing these opportunity gaps. We can't afford anymore to stymie opportunities for low-income children relative to their more affluent peers. And this means we can't afford to not provide access to early education. We can't stymie the opportunities for Latino students who are less likely to access these programs and are disadvantaged from the moment they get to start an educational journey. We can't afford to have literacy rates in the Commonwealth when less than 30% of Latino fourth graders are on grade level for reading. We can't afford for Black and Latino students, high school students, to have less access to rigorous coursework. And we can't afford for our students to have 33% access to rigorous coursework like calculus when their white counterparts have at least 50% access to these types of courses. These barriers along the educational continuum obviously stack the deck against our children, which have deep implications on the fabric, the social fabric, and the economic prosperity of the Commonwealth. I'll say a little bit more about representation because this really matters. And now more than ever, as we've seen over the summer, that we still have challenges as a nation and as a Commonwealth around sort of racial and ethnic disparities. We believe one of the solutions really is on increasing the representation of educators. And so, you know, when you have 80% of your educators across the country who are white, we know with research over time and with more leaders of color, more teachers of color, that we have an opportunity to support our students in performing better. So we want to make sure that representation, again, increases. And so one of our other policy agenda items will be pursuing policy priorities to remove barriers for Latino and Black educators to enter and stay in the profession. I know we're running short on time, so I'm just going to say a couple of more things. So despite barriers that Latino students face, we are improving on our high school graduation rates and college enrollment. So what we don't want to see is COVID impacting that upward trajectory that our community was experiencing. Our communities persist. We want to succeed and have come to this country as immigrants, like so many of your families, to pursue this promise of equal opportunity through education. So now more than ever, we see the Tech para Todos as one of the ways we need to reimagine the cradle to career opportunity pipeline that is in crisis because of COVID. And so with that, we're grateful to have been able to identify Tech para Todos as an opportunity to really accelerate some collaboration and work to improve access to tech and all the pieces that surround tech. We want to make sure we can reimagine and rebuild our education system in a way that centers our students and families, because we can't go back to what was not serving our students to begin with. We look forward to working with the Education Committee and those who have committed to work with us and the countless other organizations that signed on to our campaign around Tech para Todos, which resulted in this amazing opportunity for this Broadband Equity Commission. So before I turn it over, I'm also going to express my thanks to Speaker DeLeo, Senate President Spilka, and the legislators who believed in, along with our education chairs, who believed in this opportunity to continue putting a focus on digital equity in the time of COVID. I'll turn it back to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that great presentation. And the work you're doing here in the Commonwealth and across the country is remarkable. The work of Latinos for Education is going to impact generations of Latino children and families for years to come. And now I'm pleased to turn it over to Lorena Lopera, who is the Executive Director of our Massachusetts team. Lorena?
Thank you for that. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Thank you all for participating in this briefing today. My name is Lorena Lopera and I serve as the Executive Director here at Latinos for Education, Massachusetts. These issues are deeply personal to me as a Latina, as an immigrant, as an English language learner, and as a mother of 2 Latinx children. I grew up in a community very much like Chelsea or like Lawrence, with a large number of Latino immigrants and who would have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. My 6-year-old son, Joaquin, is currently enrolled in Boston Public Schools, and he's been learning remotely since March. And so I come to this conversation with a both personal as well as a professional lens. I'm going to share my screen so that we can get down to the nitty-gritty details of today. Perfect. So education is supposed to be the pathway to prosperity and success for our students. And we know that COVID-19 is exposing stark disparities in our education system that many of us already knew existed. The pandemic has exacerbated the opportunity gap and left an undeniable mark on our children. So it's essential that all of us rise to the challenge of this moment and respond to the needs of our children. Latinos make up over 30% of the state's COVID-19 cases, and for months, this pandemic has decimated our community. Back in spring, districts lost Latino children and families. Schools closed thinking that it would be for maybe 2 weeks. In most cases, no books were sent home. There was little communication with families, and if there was communication, it was typically in English and most often sent via email. Growing up in a household that only spoke Spanish, I can tell you that this pandemic would have been devastating for me and my family. For me, it would have meant living in an immigrant community. It would have meant my parents going to work to put food on the table, and my brothers and I would have been left home alone to figure out distance learning on our own, likely sharing one device, if that. It could have meant us going hungry if my parents lost their jobs in the restaurant industry. It could have meant us getting sick and living in fear of accessing resources. Whoa, that was fun. Sorry about that. It could have meant us being in fear of accessing resources because of our undocumented status. And so those were the questions, and that was the thinking that led us to engage families directly on how COVID-19 was impacting Latino students and families. And so, set out to understand this, we gathered Latinx multi-sector leaders, educators, and as I said, most importantly, families. To do this, we surveyed 288 Spanish-speaking families, 60 multi-sector leaders, and 60 educators. We gathered these broad and multi-sectored perspectives because we know that we will need to work together to find and advocate for solutions. When we surveyed Latino families across the state to hear how the COVID-19 pandemic was impacting their children's education, we found that 46% of parents recognized that their child was experiencing learning loss as a result of this pandemic. 21% of parents identified that their household was in need of access to devices and connectivity in order to support their child's education. And 74% of parents were worried about income insecurity or food insecurity as a result of this pandemic. Now, we know that these issues are interrelated. And while our students and our community are facing many challenges, the digital access and connectivity is one that is most time sensitive and one that we can solve. At this point, when everything from learning to accessing health and social services has gone virtual, lacking a device or connectivity is unacceptable and puts families in great danger. For students, it's almost as if they're not enrolled in school and they're in the shadows of our education system. And so we must ensure tech para todos, that everyone has the technology that they need to participate. Of the 288 Latinx Spanish-speaking parents, 27% named needing access to educational resources, and 21% named a need for technology and access to internet. We know this is consistent with data that tells us that approximately 26% of Latinx students lack adequate connectivity. At Latinos for Education, we've been actively monitoring the tech gaps that exist across the Commonwealth, and we've been pushing for universal access to technological devices and internet connectivity for all students, and especially for Black and Brown students. We know that state leaders have tried to address these needs. We know DESE has done good work. They've worked with districts to provide remote access and tech grants as they stepped into the work. And they also stepped in to work with providers to provide hotspots for families. But we also know that there is still more work that needs to be done. We know that we've tried to address these needs by ensuring that students get devices. And yet in Boston alone, the latest data shows us that 2,700 students still don't have reliable internet access, and that they're likely conservative estimates. So districts across the country and in our Commonwealth have been trying to address this need, but we still need to do more. The issues of connectivity and digital literacy remain a concern. And while the fear and strain from COVID-19 is no longer new, the challenges that our students and families face persist. We're asking you to think boldly to commit to new programs, avenues, and partnerships to help our students get the support that they need. I again want to thank Speaker DeLeo, Senate President Spilka, Chair Peisch, Chair Lewis, and all of the members of the leadership and legislature. I'm grateful for your support in establishing a Broadband Equity Commission through Budget Amendment 684. And we're optimistic that Governor Baker will approve this language in the final budget. Residential broadband access has become crucial to work, education, and health. And Americans recognize this need. A Pew Research study found that 87% of Americans viewed the internet as essential or important during the pandemic. Massachusetts is already leading in this work. Across the nation, we've already established a Massachusetts Broadband Institute. We've made investments in middle mile, and we know that cities like Cambridge and Salem have taken steps to expand equitable access to broadband. Cambridge is currently undergoing stakeholder engagement with a consulting firm called CTC to conduct a digital equity study. Salem has partnered with Sci-Fi to build a state-of-the-art fiber optics network throughout the city. And so we know that there are samplings of this happening in our Commonwealth. We're looking forward to the Tech Equity Commission so that we can bring community members, the business community and corporate partners into the conversation so that we can all be a part of the solution. We know that coordinated engagement across multiple stakeholder groups helps advance broadband goals. This commission is a step towards this type of partnership and coordination. There are many complicated challenges facing us today. This doesn't have to be one of them. The solutions exist to ensure that every student has access to the devices and broadband connectivity that they need to attend school and participate in learning opportunities. There are other states, such as Minnesota, who can serve as an example for how we tackle this in terms of private-public partnerships. And in order for our student population across the Commonwealth to be successful, we know that Latino students and families must be successful. And so that's why we're going to continue to partner with you and advocating to close the digital divide. Solving this is not only possible, but it is absolutely critical that we meet this moment with the creativity and the boldness that it requires. Thank you. I'm going to attempt to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for capturing the state of Latino education here in the Commonwealth so succinctly, and the work that you've done in response to COVID-19 and Tech para Todos is very impressive. Now it's with great pleasure that I pass it off to both Dan and Theo, the co-founders of Tech Goes Home, and an incredible organization committed to tech equity across our Commonwealth. Dan and Theo.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. And I just want to first again thank Chairs Peisch and Lewis for this briefing, and a big shout out to Latinos for Education for inviting us here. They're an amazing partner, and we're honored to be here. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen as well. Let's see if this works. Can everyone? I'm hoping people can see the screen. Is that
Yep.
Excellent? So I am Dan Noyes, the co-CEO of Tech Goes Home, and I'm going to be joined momentarily. You'll hear from Theodora Hanna, who's the other co-CEO. Just a quick note, I've been with Tech Goes Home for 10 years, and For 10 years prior to that, I worked in Boston Public Schools, most intensely in Dorchester. And so this is a very personal issue for me because I saw firsthand the divides that exist for the people that I served when I worked in those schools. So just to give you a quick overview of Tech Goes Home, our mission is to empower communities to access and use digital tools to overcome barriers and advance lives. And it is these barriers and advancements that we focus on, obviously, and those are unique to everyone. As you can see in this fun picture, COVID has impacted everything. So our courses used to be in person, and then obviously we had to go a distance model. So this is an example of one of our instructors hand delivering the technology to a family. And this instructor did that for all of her families and then basically ran a virtual course. I have a bunch of data in here, and obviously no one can remember all of this data, but I wanted to give a quick overview. If after this, you'll see our contact information. If you've got questions about sources or anything, please do reach out. As you can see, this is some of the most up-to-date data we have, but does not include a lot of the COVID information. So unfortunately, I bet these numbers are worse. As you can see, there are 468,000 households in the Commonwealth that don't have a computer and about 400,000 that don't have internet. And across the United States, this is obviously another problem that is unique to Massachusetts, but 1/3 of all American workers have little to no digital skills. And what this means is that adults cannot apply for jobs. Nearly all employers these days require online job applications. That's from CVS to Home Depot to Walmart to anywhere you want to work. You don't go in. I don't know the last person that opened up a newspaper and looked for a job. You don't do it that way anymore. It means that students, as we talked about earlier, cannot participate in learning, attend their virtual classes. It means seniors become more isolated, cut off from low loved ones. And what is very important now is that everyone gets cut off from telehealth, which is so important. So we view our work through a number of different lenses because the digital divide doesn't sit in one specific category. It does tend to impact a broad range of areas. 3 examples here. Obviously, we're focusing on academic achievement. These are national numbers, but as you can see, Black and Latinx students are disproportionately impacted by a lack of internet connectivity relative to their white peers. On the economic side of things, these stats are just insanely horrible. When it comes to 57% of Latinx workers have limited to no digital skills in our workforce. And health access might be the most stark one of all, where 71% of Latinx elders are unready for telemedicine. And unready is defined as not having the tech access or the ability to connect with their doctors, as opposed to 32% of their white peers. So what I'm going to do now is actually turn this over to Theo, and she's going to dive into a bit more about what we do.
So I'm Theo, the other co-CEO of Tech Goes Home, and thank you so much for having us. So you've seen the absolutely atrocious data, and that's where we come in. This is our formula for impact. It's essentially 3 components. It's the devices, a computer, the connectivity or internet access at home, and that's quality, affordable, reliable internet access that meets the families and individuals' needs, and also they can pay for it sustainably and without making tremendous sacrifices. And then critically, the training. So, we could give someone a book, but if we don't teach them how to read, it's not going to be very impactful. And we believe that those 3 components absolutely need to come hand in hand in order for people to be able to take full advantage of the internet and the opportunities it provides. So we serve the following. We serve about 85% are people of color, 90% very low income households, 1/3 don't have internet access when they enroll in Tech Goes Home. This stat has jumped tremendously, as you can imagine, since COVID hit. Now 42% of our incoming adult learners are unemployed. And then 50% are English language learners. So we're really helping the people who need access to the internet and the educational, employment, and health and wellness opportunities. And to give you a snapshot of the organization as a whole, we have a train the trainer, we call it, model that works with about 200 partner sites. These are schools, community centers, libraries, healthcare providers, and we teach the staff at those sites to run our 15-hour free internet skills training program. We have 375 of those instructors at partner sites right now. And our internal team is 10 currently. And our budget this year is about 3.2 million. So here's just a sampling of our impact, really touching on the areas that Dan introduced earlier. Across the board, internet skills, almost everyone, as you can imagine, walks out of the program with internet skills that can help improve their lives, which is really our goal. We're not here to tell anyone what they need and how to live their lives. We're here to empower community leaders to provide the resources that their constituents, the families in their schools, the patrons of their libraries need most, and whatever those may be. So across the board, educational opportunity, we find that 94% of caregivers report that their children use the Tech Goes Home devices for learning opportunities multiple times a week. We know that 97% of adult graduates were able to work from home during the pandemic, thanks to TGH. And then 66% have been able to access healthcare. And we really see healthcare access as something that COVID has probably changed forever. It seems as though telehealth is here to stay in some capacity. So we believe that it's a really critical component to connect individuals and families with. So again, I just want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and share our perspective. We would absolutely welcome a follow-up meeting with any of you who'd be interested in learning more about our work, and we can also coordinate course visits. It's much easier now that everything is on Zoom. As Dan mentioned, our program used to be entirely in person, so there was a good deal of travel involved, and now you hop in a Zoom classroom and you can see the program firsthand.
Well, thank you so much, Dan and Theo, for that incredible presentation and all the work that you do throughout the Commonwealth. I think I can speak for all of us when I say your dedication to bring digital literacy to marginal communities is incredibly powerful. And so at this time, I want to thank all of our panelists for their respective presentations, and I want to open up the floor for any questions from any legislators and staff, and anyone else who has any questions as well, because I know that we may have some folks from the press that are on with us too. And we're actually doing good on time, so we'll take questions right now.
I have a question if I can jump in.
Great, and who's asking question?
Crystal Haynes from Boston 25 News.
Crystal, thank you so much. We're so happy to have you with us here today.
Yeah, I mean, certainly these numbers, especially the ones that Dan presented, are shocking. Has there been any help in terms of this digital divide? And I'm not sure who could answer this more clearly in terms of, I know that there has been an effort to hand out Chromebooks and hotspots. Has that helped at all?
I can take
Lorena?
a stab. So thank you for your question. Yes, I think that there are absolutely more students and families who have access to devices with Chromebooks that have been handed out through the district, through many districts. I still think that there is a challenge that exists in terms of connectivity, because even with families who have received a hotspot, as you can imagine, multiple students in a household, if they do have multiple devices, are still trying to access live classes via Zoom, which takes a lot more bandwidth than is really available through a hotspot. So this is a longer I think this is a bigger issue, that while we do have some initiatives that are helping in the short term, that we really need to think about how do we address this in a long-term way.
Any further
I would
response?
just 100% agree with Lorena on that. I think DESE in particular did a really good job of putting a giant Band-Aid on the issue. I think there's issues, obviously, that still exist, but I don't think anyone is pretending that the work that's been done in the last 8 months is at the moment sustainable. I think that we really need to look at what happens a year from now, 2 years from now. So to continue the success that we may have seen in terms of increasing access over the last few months, this needs to be a long-term effort.
And Crystal, we're also, again, the language that's before the governor right now on establishing this Broadband Equity Commission, we're hoping that, again, this topic can be a part of that dialogue that's going to happen, to see concretely what can we do in this upcoming session to tackle the issues. Any further questions, anyone? Going once, going twice. You know, today we've had at any given time, we've had about 50 people that have participated in this briefing, and we're really happy that was the case. I do see a hand up. I see Chairwoman Peisch. Chairwoman?
I'd just like a little more information on Tech Goes Home and the extent of your reach. Is it just focused in the Boston area? Is it statewide? And how are you funded?
Thank you for the questions. We right now are really greater Boston focused. We're in about 10 cities and towns in Boston and the surrounding area. We are going to begin pursuing broader expansion geographically. We have yet to determine what that is going to look like, but will likely involve some gateway cities in Massachusetts and potentially looking outside Massachusetts. And then in terms of funding, we get significant support from the city of Boston. And then other than that, it's really a combination of corporations, foundations, individuals, earned revenue through some partners pay sort of a fee-for-service model to run a program.
Thank you.
I had a quick question, and I want to thank everyone so much for the information and for your attention on this important issue. I'm interested, I think it's a little separate from digital divide, but certainly interrelated, is what I've read and seen in some other reports and media articles about the difference among demographic groups in terms of comfort level returning to classrooms. So as a former teacher, I think of English language learners as a type of student who benefit greatly from being in the classroom with other students and with an instructor in person, but recognize, of course, that during COVID, that's incredibly challenging from a health and safety consideration. I'm also seeing that Latino parents are less comfortable sending their students perhaps back to school than white parents, for example. And I assume largely that is because of different types of conditions of school buildings and the municipalities in which these students may reside. But I'm wondering if you think about how that interplay in terms of comfort level being in person for instruction also affects and impacts the recommendations that you'll make and that you would like us to be thinking about when we talk about digital divide.
Did we account for that in our studies, Lorena or Amanda?
So we did not explicitly engage in conversations on mode of education, like the format. So we don't exactly have that. We know that other organizations have done some studies into this work. I think it's unfortunately unfortunately a lose-lose situation right now, because there is not one mode that really addresses every student demographic and family need, because there are so many different external factors. But I think the important piece is whether students are learning in schools or whether they're learning at home or if it's a hybrid, there needs to be access to digital literacy and also just connectivity long term, right? So before we used to frame this conversation around the homework divide, the nice to have, but now it's a recognition that this is an essential. And so I think long term that really needs to be the focus.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
I was just going to say, I almost think that this underscores how important the digital divide is, to the degree that these communities of color are incredibly concerned about the safety of their students being physically in a building. It calls all the more attention to the need to close this divide. So I really appreciate your time. I'm going to have to head out. I'm actually picking up a second grader hybrid student in a few moments down the road. But I'm glad to be in touch with you and glad to be thinking about this with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you have any further questions or comments? We have a couple of minutes left.
Could I just ask a follow-up question? This is Crystal Haynes from Channel 25 again. My question about this has to do with like translation. Is that still an issue in the remote learning setting, because you're having, one instructor, perhaps two if there's an ELL setting, or a paraprofessional in the classroom? Are kids who need some instruction in a second language getting what they need in a remote learning setting?
Amanda, Lorena, Dan.
I saw Amanda trying to unmute herself.
Yes, thank you. I thank you for your question. So right now, there is certainly a gap in terms of translated information and access to supports for English learners because of the tech issues that exist. And then also because, as was noted, we have higher percentages of Latino families who, when might have the opportunity to be in building, are concerned with sending their children to school for extra support. So I think that we're not where we need to be. I think there's some interesting programs such as in Holyoke. The superintendent there is working with a provider to help with translated services because there's such a high percentage of Spanish-speaking families in Holyoke, as an example. So I think that there are some bright spots, if you will, where districts are working with providers to ensure that English learners can access educational material.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I know that the Chairman Lewis has to step off. Thank you so much, Chairman Lewis, for sponsoring today's event, as well as sponsoring the Broadband Equity Commission language. I don't know if you're still on, if you want to say a quick bye-bye. And he's off. But we do have Bianca Torres, who is a reporter at the Globe, who has a question as well. Bianca, buenos días, buenas tardes, ¿cómo está?
Buenas tardes. This is a question for Amanda and possibly Lorena. Amanda mentioned in the beginning the decrease in enrollment among English learners in the state. And I've been following those numbers too, and I am curious to hear how you explain it.
I mean, I explain it, Bianca, well, thank you for your question. I explain it based on many of the things we just talked about relative to the type of access that English learners have to adequate tech devices, training, and the conditions in homes relative to access, sharing devices. We've heard so many stories about families saying, I have 3 children and 1 device. I'm going to give the device to X child so that they can be focused on their education, and the other 2 children, we have to figure out how we support. So I think what we're experiencing with English learners and decrease in enrollments does have to do with the access that they do have to the technology, to the understanding of navigating the technology, and again, the types of translation services that are available. I think all of those things which we mentioned all play a role and are factored into decrease in enrollments.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Well, we're at 1 o'clock on the dot, and guess what? Thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions. Thank you everyone for your participation in this discussion today. I also saw that that we also had another participant from Representative Garlick's office, Colin Fedor. It's nice to have you from the Assistant Chairwoman in Ways and Means office. So at this time, I want to thank our host, Chairwoman Peisch, thank you, and Chairman Jason Lewis for hosting this afternoon for us. Chairwoman, if you have any thoughts? If not, we're going to close out. Amanda, if you have any thoughts?
So, you know, I probably should say no, because everyone is probably anxious to close off the meeting and have some lunch. However, I just want to thank you for this. I think it's been very thought-provoking. I wish I could say, well, you know, unfortunately not surprising, right? We really have been very aware of the gaps that exist, and this just underscores it and makes it, I think, you know, a little bit more real in some respects. I'm really looking forward to the work of the commission with respect to the digital divide, but I also hope that once we, you know, get out of this current situation, that we can also address the other issues that you've raised. I'm very interested in the diversity of the teaching force, for example. I know that's something the board has been looking at. And I don't mean to suggest these things are all going to be put off and we won't address them until the pandemic is over, but certainly our abilities are somewhat constrained at the moment. But I look very much forward to continuing to work with your organization. I think this is, as I said at the beginning, I think it's great that it's really up and running, and we'll keep the lines of communication open and always willing to talk and take any suggestions that any of you may have relative to how we do address these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Peisch. Amanda.
I'm having a little technical difficulty. Thank you all. Thank you, Chairwoman Peisch, for your closing comments. And we are just, again, grateful to have this opportunity to address the challenges and opportunities that technology can provide for all students. And we continue to be excited about what lies ahead. So we appreciate all of you who have participated in the Tech Para Todos campaign, and we will continue to pursue that in earnest with and behalf of our communities. Thank you all.
Thank you again, everyone. And again, from everybody's living room and from everybody's attic space to the State House, thank you for participating. And remember, everybody should be looking at the Latinos for Education handle on Twitter, as well as the Tech Goes Home Twitter handle as well, and Instagram handles, so that you can get updates on where things are and where we're going on a day-to-day basis. And in some cases, maybe hour to hour. So thank you everybody for participating, and to all of our legislators and staff for such a great presentation today. Que tengan buen día a todos y gracias.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.